Hi there, I'm Ben Pearson. Welcome to the Tech World Human Skills Podcast. Every episode we talk through how to thrive in the tech world, not just survive. Now, if you want me to work with your team, just give me a shout. I love to help teams be more influential, memorable and successful with their stakeholders. Head over to www.techworldhumanskills.com to book a chat. Hi everyone and welcome to the Tech World Human Skills Podcast. It's wonderful to have you with us. So today we're talking about being a CTO. Now, a lot of people listening might have CTO career aspirations. A lot might report into a CTO and others might be selling to CTOs. So I thought it would be great to chat to someone about all things CTO. Now, our guest today has spent many years as a CTO. He's also been a CTO advisor and non-executive director. And what's more, you may well have seen him hosting the London Tech Leader panels or even hosting the CTO Lens podcast. So please, can you welcome to the show, David Crawford. David, it's wonderful to have you with us.
Thank you, Ben. Lovely introduction. It's absolutely wonderful to be here.
Well, we're going to be talking all things CTO this morning, which I'm really looking forward to. But for all our lovely listeners that perhaps haven't crossed paths with you before, could you tell us a bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure, of course. So I've been in technology all my life. Started off as an engineer. We called them programmers back then, programming in COBOL and ICL mainframes. I was never very good at it. I was better at organising people who were better at technology, software engineering than I was. So I made a career out of that. Grew up through a bit of project and program management, a bit of managing large teams. Worked for companies such as, I worked for the government to start with, and then for BT, Sky. I've worked, which was foundational in sort of developing me ready to be a CTO, and then came out of Sky, had my first CTO position with the National Lottery, as it was a few years ago, and then I've gone on from there and held technology leadership positions in startups, scale-ups, and now I'm fractional, which we'll get into what that actually means in a minute, because that's a whole new world that's come online. I was technical. I still class myself as technical, but as we'll discuss as we go through, what does the modern CTO role need? I'm sort of more about the people, the organization, the processes surrounding the world of technology now. That's where I've really honed my skills, and where I trade as a CTO today.
Oh, brilliant. Well, shall we dig in then with some good old-fashioned questions? So let's start off with the real basics. What is a CTO?
Well, the trouble is that I'm going to tell you what I think a CTO is now, and there'll be 100 comments on here telling you what somebody else thinks a CTO is, right? And that's part of the challenge, right? It is complicated. And of course, we have other terms that we'll talk about as well. But the CTO, the modern CTO today, is really the person in your company who is leading the technology vision and strategy and responsible for delivering and operating technology across your company. And that's kind of true whether you're an internally focused digital company who sell socks that you manufacture, or whether you're a Meta who have all the digital consumer facing products. That really doesn't matter. The CTO is ultimately responsible for building those and for running those systems, and all of the people and all of the budgets and everything that's included within that.
So how does that compare to a CIO? Because I often hear these sort of terms. Often it seems they're mixed around. Sometimes I don't know the difference. From your perspective, what therefore be the difference between a CIO and a CTO?
So I'm on record as saying that I think that a CTO can do CIO responsibilities, but a CIO can't necessarily do CTO responsibilities. And when I made that, it went viral on TikTok, and I got into a lot of trouble over it. So I'll try and refine my answer a little bit now. I think that the traditional CIO role has been really evolved out of the IT manager role, the person who's managing a bunch of people who look after the server room, the network, the virus scanner, all of those kind of internal systems that companies use. Whereas the CTO has been much more about developing products that are outward facing, either B2B or B2C, but outward facing products that people outside of your company are going to use. But it's blurred recently, right? Some CIOs are looking after as the CIO is Chief Information Officer, are looking after all of the information and data internally and externally to the company. So they would say, no, I'm very customer focused, I'm very outward facing, right? And then it blurs the lines a little bit. And I think basically I'm thinking of a CIO from its traditional sense as an internal IT manager evolution role. And therefore I'm saying, because I've held that position, I've done that work. And often as the CTO, you are responsible. So Naked Wines, for example, I was the CTO for Naked Wines and looked after all of the systems and products that went out to Naked Wines customers. But I was also responsible for the server room, the cloud accounts, the security internally, the Microsoft Office platform that we used, etc., etc. So, I think it can get confusing, and shouldn't worry about it too much. It's more about what the company needs you to do. I think it's just at the minute the CTO title is a bit more trendy than the CIO title. That's the main thing at the moment.
Right, gotcha. So, right, okay. So as I'm sort of thinking about what you're saying there, so like if you were a big utility, for example, that was running a big internal IT system, that might be more CIO-ish, maybe. That might be the roots of the background that it came from. Whereas if you're maybe a born in the cloud SaaS provider, it may be more that sort of had a bit more of a CTO sort of legacy.
I think it's a good split. And I think also, therefore, it doesn't mean the CTO role is more important than the CIO role, right? Some of the CIO roles in this country are huge, running hundreds of thousands, so for example, the NHS, and I'm a non-executive director in the NHS, so I've recently sort of navigated my way around that. The NHS doesn't have CTOs because although they have patients, they're not sort of outwardly looking at systems from that point of view. They have CIOs and a fair few of them, and it's increasing over time. But yeah, it to a certain extent, it's what you need as a company. But that's the kind of split. And then of course there's things like VP of engineering, which that they're about levels, really. Americans, VPs, SVP, that's a more of an Americanism sort of thing, and that's fine. You can have an SVP, or a VP of engineering who's kind of in charge. Some companies have heads of IT, heads of technology, heads of software engineering. Yeah, it doesn't. I mean, the title doesn't really matter, and it matters if you haven't held it. That's the key. If you've not held the title, it sort of matters to you. And then you get the first time I got the CTO title, I was like, yeah, this is great, right? And then after I'd held it like 3 times, I was like, yeah, I'm over it. I don't care what I'm called anymore. So.
Yeah, call me what you want. So you got all these different things, and they're always maybe doing similar things, maybe doing different things depending on what the business needs. Now, what about in those sort of different settings? So I guess you've got the setting of, right, we're in startup mode versus, right, we're now scaling out versus like we're a huge mama jamma company sort of thing. So what's the CTO in those sort of different settings?
So again, it's a real kind of horses for courses thing. It's basically, as you say, CTO or CIO, or even, when I was at Sky, I was the role I held was head of software engineering at Sky, right? I had more people in the organization I looked after, more budget responsibility, and more P&L responsibility for the products that were going out than I've ever had since. Right. And I've held the CTO title about 3 or 4 times since. Right. So it's just that I've held CTO title at smaller companies than Sky. And so it's really weird that you sort of in that company, a head of can have more responsibility and therefore need more skills and experience than a CTO over here. And you're like, yeah, that's how it could literally be. And then, of course, in startups, it's very popular to, if you're a 3, 4, 5 person startup, to be the founding CTO. Yeah. And that's great. Chances are you wouldn't pull somebody, really, like you wouldn't pull somebody from the CTO of Barclays Bank to become and be the CTO of a startup. That person would much more likely be an advisor to your startup, right, about strategy and stuff. Because the CTO of Barclays Bank, chances are that individual hasn't coded or done any architecture or structural, engineering design or anything like that, or product development for years. They've been stuck in the boardroom, right?
Yeah.
And so you need somebody on the ground who probably can code, somebody who knows the difference between on-prem and cloud, all of those kind of things, and somebody who can work with the small development team, engineering team you've got, and do a bit of product and a bit of software design and all of those kind of things, as well as make sure that the virus scanner is working correctly inside the company. So you need to be a much more kind of low-level, hands-on person if you're in a startup. And then a scale-up is like this confusing world between the two. And scale-up's often where I play, because I've got the big enterprise experience where it's all, quite strict and quite process-driven, out of necessity often, even though large enterprises can still innovate. And then you've got the startup world where it's all about just do it, break the rules, move fast, blah, 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 and bend the rules and stuff like that. And then in between, you're going from one and you want to be the other. And so you have to just start going, okay, well, what can I take from the enterprise world, but apply it so that we're not going to constrain the fast pace of a startup world? And it's that balance in between. Plus, often a startup, so a scale-up CTO, their first thing is, can you double the size of the team? We've just got some funding. Can you double the size of the team? So, you're straight into like recruiting a bunch of people, right? And so all of those different challenges, and they spread across. My advice to anybody who wants to be a CTO, it's funny enough, is start in enterprise world, right? Enterprise world actually gives you a real good grounding in almost every aspect of what it takes to be a future CTO. And then you can go to startup later and get a bit grungy and all that kind of stuff, or sit in the middle of scale up, bringing that enterprise experience into a startup world. So it's lots of opportunity, but they are incredibly different roles. And nobody appreciates that because we just go CTO, CIO.
And now you mentioned you were doing a lot of fractional CTO work at the moment, and you were saying that's the new thing, that's the trendy thing, that's the thing that's now come online. What do you mean by fractional CTO?
So I think listeners will be familiar with perm roles, right? So just like anybody can be a permanent role, you can be a permanent CTO, CIO, whatever. And there'll be, a lot of people will have heard about interim, which is kind of a hired gun. You come in, maybe somebody's left, maybe you need to do a piece of transformation to get to the next level or whatever.
Hatchet man.
Yeah, well, maybe. In the last couple of years, interim has meant come in and reorganize us, reshape us, get rid of a whole load of people. And sometimes being an interim, knowing that you're going to leave, that can be easier, right? Because you're like, I'm only going to be here for a short time. I'm being paid to sort this challenge or problem out or deliver this vision or whatever. So your approach to that is different. It sometimes takes a different sort of personality to do that. But again, that's everybody understands interim, what it means. But then we've introduced this term fractional. And I was talking to somebody about it the other day, and somebody said, so it's part-time. And I went, no, it's not part-time, not at all. It's fractional. And they went, but you work not 5 days a week. And I'm like, yeah, that's right. But you're there permanently. And I'm like, yeah, that's right. And they're like, right, so it's not interim. I'm like, no. And they're like, and it's not perm. And I'm like, well, it is perm, but it's only fractional. And they're like, yeah, but a fraction of your time is by definition. I'm like, all right, it's a part-time gig. Yeah, that's what it is. It's a part-time gig. So we've dressed it up as fractional. And again, lots of the recruiters out there are going to shoot me because fractional's the buzzword, right? Sort of thing. But yeah, it's part-time. And the beauty of it is, and I actually think, I put a post on LinkedIn on this recently, or a comment on somebody's post. I think that the fractional world might be stopping the permanent world at senior leadership, and maybe one level down, returning, because it's been dry for the last couple of years, certainly due to the global market. But actually what's happening is that companies are going, so I could get all of your 20, 30 years experience and leadership and only pay you for 2 days a week. Right. And the other 3 days a week, I don't care what you're doing, right? So, and it's like, but when you were perm and I was paying you for 5 days a week, I didn't know what you were doing 3 days a week anyway. I only saw you 2 days. And so in CEOs' minds, in boards' minds, they're starting to go, there is no downside to this. I can pay a lot less money and get all of the experience. And I think people like me are going, yeah, Yeah, I think that's right, but then we're sort of adding a little margin on top of the day rate to make sure that caters for that. And the last thing I'm going to say about fractional is if you're thinking of stepping into that world, the diary juggle is a nightmare.
Yeah. Yeah. Because it's not just 2 days. It's not like Monday and Tuesday you do. It's right. We've got meetings sprinkled throughout the week, I'm imagining, or
Yeah,
things
so
you need to do.
at the minute I have 5 roles, and they
Okay.
all know about each other in the sense, not in detail, but they all know that I work for different people, different companies, but I make it seamless to them. Right? I very rarely turn down a meeting request. I just juggle things around and move things around. And so consequently, each of my customers believes that they're the most important customer. And that's how I make them feel. That's how I interact with them. And that's hopefully for them the value that I deliver to them. So you can see why it's an attractive model for companies.
Mm. Well, let's start to maybe dig into the sorts of skills and experiences that you need in order to thrive as a CTO.
Sure.
Should we start with tech? I do appreciate that you've sort of said, well, actually, if you're a startup versus Barclays Bank, they're going to be very different types of roles. But do you need a deep tech background to thrive as a CTO?
This topic gets highly debated in lots and lots of forums. I would say 70 to 80% of the time, the answer from whoever you're talking to falls down to yes, absolutely. You need to have technical chops to, somewhere in your background to be able to understand how engineers work, how to get the best value out of them, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that's where I am. I think for 80% of the card-carrying CTOs, technology leadership roles, if you don't have some tech credentials in your background, if you haven't been around the block once or twice, that doesn't necessarily mean you need to code, but maybe you've been a technology operational leader and understand like incidents and infrastructure and release processes and all that kind of stuff. I believe that you have to have some insight into how technology gets designed, developed, delivered, and how it operates. If you don't, you might make mistakes. Now, the controversy around that is that we're living in a world for a lot of digital first companies of product development, right? So, digital product development has come along, and it's basically been positioned as the thing that will make sure that we prioritize and design the things that are going to be functionally rich and appropriate for our customers and benefit the company in terms of moving forward. And that sort of responsibility has been lumped into this thing called product management, right? And it's sort of worked and sort of hasn't. Depends on the different places. So a lot of engineers who were like, yeah, I just want to sit in the basement listening to my music, banging out great code. And there are people who, you should leave them alone to do that. They're like, oh, great. So you product managers are all going to go off and talk to the business. I don't have to engage with anybody now. This is great. I'm happy, sort of thing. And then there are product managers who don't understand the technology enough. And so they're making up, flights of fancy and fictional things and coming along and engineers are getting frustrated because they can't. If you don't have, as the technology leader, the ability to, bring those two teams together, arbitrate between them, explain from one to the other what they're trying to do, then you're just going to have people fighting and stuff like that. So I personally believe that the CTO and the CIO role and a head of engineering and a VP of software and all those kind of things, you've got to have a software background. But then bringing that back to me as an individual, and my point at the start, I do have, and I like to, I'm about to say this publicly, so anybody who works for, me in the future will know this, I guess, but I like to keep a little bit back, right? So I can every now and again show a flash of understanding. Now, I can jump up on a board and draw a bit of an architecture and sometimes that surprises my teams. I've been working with them for a year. They've never heard me reference serious architecture. And then I get up and start drawing lines and they're like, did you know he knew that? I didn't know he knew how to do that, sort of thing. Right? And do you know what? That's okay. It keeps them on their toes, right? That's all right. But in actual fact, I'm just not the best at it, right? And I think that what I'm the best at is organizing the people who are the best at that to do that work. right?
Yeah.
And that's for me is leadership, right? And there's a lot of talk about, servant leadership. There's a lot of talk about inspirational up the front leadership. I'm like, it doesn't matter what it is. There's all sorts of leadership that you need to do depending on the team you're working with, the organization size, the stakeholders you've got, all of that kind of stuff. But for me, the leadership role is to bring a bunch of talented people together, technologists, non-technologists, and give them the ability to do great work.
So you started to delve into that a little bit. Aside from that tech background, then leadership you've covered, but what other skills do you need, and do you need to invest in developing to be a great CTO?
So I'll talk about the skills that I think are important. But this is the thing that scares people off, right? This is the thing where you get some great engineers come through, some great architects. Maybe they become a senior engineer, senior architect, an expert QA automation person, whatever. And they're sort of getting to that point of their career. I've done a bit of that, done a bit of that. Like, oh, I could go for it here. I could go all the way, sort of thing. And then they often reach out to me for a chat and say, look, I'm thinking of getting into leadership. What do you think? And I'm like, how are you with spreadsheets? And they're like, what's that? What are we talking about? And I'm like, well, finance. Finance is probably the most significant lever that you have to know how to pull. And they're like, sorry, finance? I'm applying for an IT leadership role here. And you're like, no, finance, you will become responsible for the budget. And in forward-thinking companies, shall we say, generically, technology is seen as a core part of the business. In a lot of companies, technology is seen as a cost center. And so being able to understand how much it costs for these wonderful group of individuals you've got over here, or this new shiny piece of cloud technology you've got over here, right? Or even the laptops that you're justifying that your engineers definitely need the best one with the mega chips and all that kind of stuff, right? You have to understand all of that. You have to know how much it costs. You have to put it in a big long spreadsheet or some posh ERP system or something. And you have to be able to justify it. You have to be able to say, well, that's going to enable us to do that, which is going to enable us to do that, which delivers this value to the company. You kind of have to get your accountancy gig on to be able to be a really decent CTO. I'll caveat that with, if you're a startup CTO who's basically a senior engineer who's coding and creating the next world of greatness for this startup, do you really have to? Probably not. Because you probably get a lump of money and it's like, go fast, don't worry about the money. And you've probably got a CFO or something who'll do that, right? So again, it depends. But if you want to operate in scale up or startup, if you want to operate with a team of like 20 plus people and multi-million pound budgets, you better understand finance, right? Now, instantly, a lot of your listeners will be going, right, well, that's me out. I'm done. Right. So I think actually it's not that hard. We're not talking about being computer whiz kids. And all you actually have to do, here's a secret for everybody, just go and find somebody in finance who wants to help you, right? Who actually wants to understand your world. Because most finance people don't understand the world of technology. I mean, pretty much nobody outside of technology understands the world of technology. So go and help them. Go and bring them into your world and they'll bring you into theirs, right? So finance is a big one for me. But then there's a whole load of other stuff. And I'm campaigning for the term soft skills to be reapplied. I think they're hard skills in leadership. They might be soft skills when you're, a developer or a product manager or a QA and you've got to go and annoyingly talk to somebody. So you've got to get your presentation skills up and stuff like that. You might call them soft skills then. But when you're a leader, soft skills are hard skills. Right? Okay. You have to be able to communicate. You have to be able to adjudicate between people, right? You have to be able to debate. You have to be able to understand people's work issues. You have to understand their personal issues more and more these days. You have to understand that. You have to understand the rules of HR. And how that applies to the workplace environment. You have to understand all sorts of things, including organizational design. So, organizational design is really hard. We're all looking at org charts and stuff like that, and we go, yes, that person reports to that person and that person. And somebody comes along and goes, we should flatten this hierarchical structure. And you're like, what, just get a smaller piece of paper? What does that mean? So and you have to work out how people engage with each other, and then processes. I mean, I think actually being a technology leader and working with people, not just technologists, but people else who, people who say they're non-technology people, you almost have to be a bit of a psychologist, really, to understand how the human mind works and how people engage with each other. And I love that, right? If I wasn't in technology, I'd either be a master craftsman, because I love wood and all things to do with that, or I'd be a psychologist, right? Because I just find the way that humans interact absolutely fascinating. And if you get those skills as a technology leader and understand what drives people, what motivates people, I think that's really, really important for some of those skills. And I hate that they're called soft skills. They should be called bloody hard skills.
And it's what you're sort of saying there is it's quite a breadth, isn't it? Perhaps when you're in individual contributor roles, you can be a great coder, a great project manager, a great whatever. But actually, when you're a CTO, you've got to be able to understand all of those roles, translate between those roles, communicate effectively with those roles, think about how much it costs. So you've got that tech, leadership, finance, org design, and we haven't even got to things like performance management. How do you make your top performers really, thrive and fly? And how do you maybe deal with people that either haven't got the skills or need to develop the skills in order to be able to thrive? So there's so much, it seems, that you need to be doing.
There is, and you touch on performance management there, right? This is a much maligned area, right? Performance management, you mean telling people they're crap? It's like, no, sort of thing. You have to do performance management across the organization, and it becomes organization-wide, team-based and individual-based, right? And so you have to have some process, some sort of like approach to doing performance management across the company. So that starts with the C-suite, as far as I'm concerned, right? How we're expecting people to deliver. Yes, OKRs, objectives, whatever. They're all important. Setting goals for the company that everybody can align to and know how they contribute to. That's all really, really important. But also behavioral management, right? How are we expecting people to behave with each other? And you might think, oh, come on, they're all grown-ups. We don't need to have a behavioral management policy. Well, I've got the scars to say that you do, right? You need to talk to people about how we as a company want to behave. And some people will encapsulate that in values for the company. But actually, when it comes down to it, again, another hard skill is, how do you deliver feedback to people? Good feedback's easy, right? Hey, you're doing well, let's go to the pub, sort of thing. Bad feedback, what do you do and how hard do you go on the data? Well, I was checking your how many times you'd how many PRs you'd issued in the last month, and you're down 30%, right? That's quite a harsh metric to go on, because actually it might not be their fault. It might be because they were stuck in meetings with some stakeholder who just couldn't make up their mind about what they wanted and kept changing the scope, right? So you've got to learn to navigate that, and you've got to be able to spot the trends through an organization. And then if the worst comes to worst, you've got to be able to get rid of people. Now, I've probably in my career, I think I've done 3, maybe 4 restructuring. Let's be clear, that means making people redundant, telling people that you are no longer going to employ them and pay them, right? That never stops being challenging to do. Doesn't matter how experienced you are at it. But let me tell you, if you haven't done performance management, how you over the last couple of years previous to coming to a situation like that, what measure do you use? How do you look that person in the eye and say, we're keeping, Sarah over you, Fred, because of, right? How do you do that sort of thing? And managers don't invest enough time in that. Leaders don't invest enough time in that. And it's because it's scary and it's a bit, how do you talk about it? Leaders put a policy in place. Leaders put a process in place, and then they talk about it all the time when you're not in times of crisis. And you talk about how you're going to promote people, and you talk about how people are going to be succeeded by other people. You even talk about who's going to succeed you and how that might look like, right? And I'm not looking, when I join a company, I'm not looking for the exit, but I'm always cognizant about looking for that next CTO or CIO who will come and replace me. And that's, I've talked for the last 10 minutes. I've said nothing about software, nothing about code, nothing about architecture, nothing about delivery, right? And you're like, come on, this is what leadership at the technology level is all about. It's about doing that. And then there's one final thing, one final skill set that I think that you have to have, and it's talking to non-technologists. Now, I have a little bit of a debate, right? Loads of people, CEOs are particularly good at this. They turn up and on day one, they go, yeah, I'm not techie. I don't understand technology. I'm not techie at all. And they're basically going, so that's just, you deal with all of that, right? And of course you do have to, that's your responsibility. But actually, they are techie. Everybody who exists in today's society is techie. You know, if you've ever used Netflix, well, there's a little bit of a navigation to do that. And you've got a button that's doing it and you've understood you have to go to that screen, not that screen, right? So if you've used online bank accounting, you've navigated a technical solution, right? You've got your mobile phone, you're making it do stuff, right? Everybody is engaging with technology all the time, and they do understand a lot more about how it works. So, you know, in terms of communicating, it's very difficult to turn up to your non-technical colleagues and start talking in a really detailed technical language. But that's the art of communication that a CTO, CIO technology leader needs to develop. And you need to be able to explain things. I use anecdotes. I use stories. I use analogies. Analogies are great. I'm always banging on about a bus or a grapefruit or something or other to explain a concept of technology. But the other thing that you've got to do there as a leader is know when to shut up, know when to not bother. They don't need to understand this. Let's be clear about the things that, you know, I need to understand my budget, but the chief financial officer doesn't turn up and explain the rules of accounting and annual submissions to me every 5 minutes, right? I don't need to know. That's why they're there. Yeah. So you work out what people need to know, and then you help them to understand that. So a lot of your technology leadership is communicating technology things to non-technologists. And you should practice that skill from like a junior developer upwards, because it's going to stand you in good stead later in life.
Brilliant, some brilliant advice there, some brilliant skills. Now you started to talk there about engaging with the rest of the business. How much of a CTO role is looking after the empire, you know, the bit you're after, versus, right, actually, I'm just a part of a bigger business now, and I've got to interact with all these different business units, these different leaders, these different stakeholders. How much of it is around that?
So I think a large part, right? I think that it's important to be visible to your team. So I think there is, you have to have face time and engagement time with your team. And if that's a big team, when I was at Sky, I had sort of 500 plus engineers who were part of my team. And we had this big building. They were kind of more or less all in, although we had a bunch of people in Portugal as well. And, I'd walk around this building and people call me DC and everybody would be like, hi, DC, hi, DC. And I was like, hi. Like, you've got no idea who these people are. So making an effort to be visible to your team and engage with your team, that's a big part of the role. But then the stakeholders, they all want a piece of you because you're they see you as the ultimate conduit to getting their thing done, right? And so you have to invest time. Depending on the size of the organization, that's coffees, lunches, beers after work. Sometimes it's that. Sometimes it's turning up with a very formal presentation in non-techie words that explains what it is that you're doing or how you're going to meet their challenges. A lot of the time, it's just listening to what it is, and maybe challenging occasionally, but listening to what it is that they need. So I call that stakeholder management, basically, right? But the key to setting that up for success, and actually, I wrote a post on this on LinkedIn recently about questions I ask a CEO before I'll take a CTO job. And one of them is, what's the role of technology? How do you see my role and the technology team's role? And if they use words like, well, you're there to, support the business, right? Or you're a bit of a cost center, but, unnecessary, any of that kind of stuff, I'm out the door, right? So I think the answers I'm looking for are, you're an integral part of the business. You are the business, right? Sort of thing. And you get this in companies. You talk about technology and the business. That's a red flag, right? We are the business. We've got to be interested, even if you're just delivering internal technology functions, right? I mean, take AI. All of the marketeers and salespeople out there are all clamoring to get the best use of AI, to get all of their, the work that they do really ramped up through AI. Who is going to provide that technology to them? Where is that system going to come from, right? It's got to come from the technology team, so it's appropriate, secure, et cetera, So, you have to be living and breathing the day-to-day interactions of what a business is, what it's trying to do. And so I believe that it's a large part of technology leadership role is being visible to the business as well as to your team, and also getting your team visible to the business. And that's a real great career development for people, because as a technology leader, you're also responsible for helping people develop their careers. Surprise, surprise, right? And so getting your team in front of non-technical people, helping them, coaching them to speak in a language and also listen to the language that's being talked to them, that's all part of it as well. So yeah, a lot of time. You can't bury yourself in a basement listening to AC/DC, I'm afraid. I mean, you can, but just at the weekends, right?
Now, do you know what? Time is vast, quickly disappearing from us. So, no, please don't apologise. It's just basically me saying I need to start to wrap this up, Ben. I need to do my job as a host. Now, but before we wrap this up, for people that are going, do you know what? Despite everything that you've said, I think this might be something I'm interested in doing and developing myself like that. So if you were thinking, I want to be a CTO, what would you recommend people do next?
So I think the biggest thing is go and find a CTO. And if you're pretty low down in the organization, just hierarchically, you might think I'm a junior developer and I'd like to be a CTO one day. I'm not sure I can go and knock on the CTO's door today. Then find somebody a couple of rungs up, not your manager, but go and find a head of or something like that, right? And don't say to the head of, I want to be the CTO. Say, I want to be a head of. Right. So start early. I've enjoyed a career where I haven't really planned hugely significantly in front. I just sort of enjoy what I'm doing and take the opportunities as they come. And I've been fortunate in that way. But actually, there is nothing wrong with a bit of planning. There's nothing wrong with saying, right, I'm a junior now. Within 4 years, I want to be a mid. Within 8 years, I want to be a senior. Within 15, I want to be a head of. And, there's nothing wrong with planning that out. Go and find somebody who's been there or is there now, and ask them to mentor you. And mentoring's a big one. We've all got, really onto mentoring. And off the back of this podcast, right, I guarantee you, even though I'm saying now, please don't do it, I will get hit up on LinkedIn by a bunch of people going, would you be my mentor, please, right? And it's a nice compliment in one way, but the trouble is, if I responded to every single person who asked to be a mentor about, leadership and stuff like that, I'd never actually get any paying work, which would be a shame for Mrs. Crawford. But I think although I do love coaching and mentoring and providing a little bit of help and support for the next generation coming through, find somebody a bit closer to you, and actually maybe find somebody outside of your company. Right? People love the compliment. I do, for sure. People love the compliment of being asked to give you some advice, particularly if it's personal career development advice for you. People love that compliment, and they were in your position once too. So go and ask, and don't be scared. I know you pitched it as like, if all of that stuff doesn't scare you, it's not scary, right? It was scary when I didn't understand it, but actually it's new skills for you. Chances are the reason you're thinking about going into senior technology leadership is because you've mastered the other parts, and you're a bit like, what's next? And everybody wants the money that comes with technology leadership if it's there, but you wouldn't go and torture yourself just for money, right? Sort of thing. You must be interested in developing yourself and learning new skills, and I think that's at every part of your career. Go and find somebody who's been there, ask them, and I bet you. And if the first one says no, then ask the next one, right? I think that's it. Can you read books? Can you listen to podcasts? You can do all of those things. Of course you can. You can even go on training courses. And that's why I say enterprises are good training grounds for future leaders, right? I've only ever been sent on a management or leadership training course when working for a large enterprise. They're the only people who still maintain their training budgets. Everybody else has cut back on them. They're the only people who really sort of like process-wise engage in your development and go on these courses. Now, courses are courses, right, sort of thing, but it gives you some grounding. It gives you some good thinking. And then, of course, you're responsible for developing yourself. Read, listen, practice, ask other people. It's just like anything in life. If you're interested in doing it, be curious about it.
Well, I think we're almost at time there. So maybe just a quick summary. So for people that have maybe zoned out, shock horror whilst people are listening to a podcast, what would be the key takeaways that people should take from this episode?
I think that people should understand that saying CTO is is only part of the story. You've got to scratch a little bit below the surface. Is it CTO? Is it CIO? Is it VP of engineering? Is it for a small company, a large company? Do I need to be hands-on technical? Do I need to be more about the people and the organization? So, that should please people who are thinking, well, it sounds a bit boring. There's so much variety in there, right? So a key takeaway is, and you can do all of those, by the way, right? And jump from and move between. So that's a key takeaway. Look below the surface of the title is my key takeaway there. And then the other thing I think is that if once you've looked below the surface, truly understand all the skills that you're going to need. Don't just enter it thinking, I'm a great developer, I'm a great architect, I'm a great QA engineer, right? I'm a great product manager. Those things are great, but they're the role you're in today. You might be brilliant at that. You need to understand what it takes to do this role over here. So do your research on that and start learning those skills as you go and developing them. And then I think the third takeaway for me is be curious about it, right? It won't just happen. Nobody turns up one day and goes, we think we're going to make you the CTO, right? That doesn't happen. So be curious, ask people, let them know you're interested about evolving into a senior technology leadership role, and people will help you. Lots and lots of people helped me. We'd have to do another podcast for me to name those individuals. But lots of people helped me, and they will help you.
Yeah. But brilliant. I mean, from my perspective, I completely agree with all of those points that you've made. When I've worked as a head of, or I've worked with senior leaders, and in fact, that's why I started the company in this podcast, because those soft skills, the hard skills, that was what I noticed. Was my tech skills were great. Yeah. But there was so much else that I needed that was going to help me thrive in the career. And so to your point, little plug for some other podcast episodes. We've got episodes on how do you give great feedback, or how do you translate to the business. All of these sorts of skills that you've been talking about. Completely agree. So thank you so much for bringing them to the fore. Really, really interesting. Now, final things. If people have really enjoyed what you've been talking about, interested in this CTO world a little bit more, sure. Anything that you'd recommend to people?
Yeah, so as you mentioned right at the start, I've been with London Tech Leaders leading a lot of their events for the last few years. In fact, we've got an event this October, and that will be an annual event with a 2-day summit for that, and I'll be there hosting that. And I do a podcast with them called the CTO Lens, and it's kind of all about this kind of stuff, and we dive deep, but that's with experienced CTOs, because I'm coming across here as if I know everything. Of course I don't. I've only been around the block once or twice, but we get on some really top flight CTOs, all sorts of different experience, and we ask them all of these kind of questions and dive into it. So if you like this kind of thing, then that's an area, the CTO Lens. I think the other thing is that I'm out there making money, right? I'm a fractional CTO, and that's good. I've started giving a bit of coaching, bit of mentoring advice, and as I say, you can get a bit deluged with people individually on that. I do coach and mentor some individuals, but I'm a bit full on that for the moment. But for companies, it's also a service I'm offering, is to go in and help them if their CTO or their future CTO needs a bit of coaching, or their organizational design is not delivering what they want it to deliver. So basically all the things that we've talked about, you could hire me as a fractional or an interim, or just for a small piece of consultancy to do it. And there's, I'm not the only one doing this out there. There are other people doing it. So, but yeah, that sort of thing is a good way to engage in this experience as well.
Brilliant. And probably best, and I'll pop it in the show notes, LinkedIn. I'll pop your LinkedIn profile in there so people can make sure they get the right David Crawford. So people can reach out to you there. Well, final thing for me to say is thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been really insightful, really interesting, and really energizing. So thank you so much for coming and talking to us.
It's an absolute pleasure, Ben. And I think your point about you do such a wide variety of content. When you asked me to come on, I looked at some of your previous and I thought, yeah, this is great. And if you listen to lots and lots of these podcasts that you've done, Ben, you'll get a real good covering. So hopefully I've contributed to that in some way. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Brilliant. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Don't go yet. Remember to subscribe to the podcast and rate the show. It really helps us grow and book new great guests. And remember, if the podcast isn't enough for you and you want weekly microlearning delivered straight to your inbox, sign up to the Tech World Human Skills Weekly. Head over to www.techworldhumanskills.com to sign up.